Hi, this is Dr. Sana Hashmi. I'm a fellow at the Taiwan Asia Exchange Foundation. And this week in my Prince Eye on China column, I tracked down the Chinese discourse on the trajectory of the EV sector in China and what are the implications and how the Western, specifically the US tariff on Chinese EV is actually driving China towards self determination and a more optimistic self sufficiency and a more optimistic uh, trajectory in the EV sector. So, when we talk about the US tariffs, specifically now the trade and tech war between China and US, we are seeing that it is absolutely going to be continued. So now what China is doing, it's seeing such tariffs on specifically on its EV sector, not just as trade restrictions, but they're also seeing it as a direct challenge to counter China's rise, specifically in the global EV market. But instead of taking it as a challenge, China is actually using this as a fuel for a major shift. It's now doubling down on self reliance, technological innovation, and expanding into new markets beyond the US and even beyond Europe. And some of the new markets are Southeast Asian market, Middle East, and also parts of Africa. Specifically, if you look at Southeast Asia, countries such as Singapore, Vietnam, Cambodia, all these countries have become now new key targets for Chinese EV sector, because these are the countries that are now offering fewer regulatory headaches for China, and there is absolutely growing demand for EVs. So now it also shows, and perhaps there's a projection that countries in this part of the region are more concerned about the environmental issues rather than the US and Europe. And these, and perhaps from the Chinese perspective, the idea that these countries are putting tariffs, imposing tariffs on the on EV, particularly Chinese EVs, primarily because of the rising tension and the hegemonistic tendencies of these countries. So the idea that these countries are not really moving towards collective solution towards environmental issues, towards climate change, towards green energy, something that if we look at the discourse, this is also part of the projection. So now the West tightening the screws with tariffs on China. So that has only pushed China further into finding new markets, into self sufficiency. And case in point is, of course, Chinese company, EV company BYD's market share in, for example, in Singapore, it has now hit 14% of all new car registrations. And I think this happened last year. So that was absolutely a huge milestone for a Chinese brand, specifically when it is seeing such a backlash from the Western markets, from the US. So in my opinion, EVs aren't just about cars for China. They are now becoming a pillar of its long-term economic, technological, and environmental strategy. So the focus here is, of course, innovate at home, invest heavily in battery tech, pivot towards market that don't have as many trade barriers. But rather than seeing Western tariffs as a setback, I don't think there's any doubt that China is treating them as an opportunity to fine tune the policies at home, to boost industrial competitiveness, and also to cut dependence on foreign markets. And then this is specifically after what is happening, the China trying to reduce dependence on foreign market. EV is of course one of the most impacted sectors as well. But I think the thing that we have to look here at is how China is turning these challenges, this crisis into an opportunity. And this is just not about EVs. I think this has been Chinese strategy or policies with respect to how to deal with the US trade war, how to deal with the tariffs that are coming out from Trump 2.0 administration. So now, when we talk about EVs, specifically after looking at the discourse, I have realized that China is going full throttle on EVs, and the upcoming China EV 100 forum that is going to convene from March 28th, and it's going to end on the 30th March in Beijing, is bringing together big players from countries' EV and tech scene, and it just shows just how serious China has been with respect to becoming a bigger player in the EV sector. And in fact, one Chinese blogger, he noted that for China, the goal is clear. Of course, the idea is to reduce dependence on oil is very much there. But apart from that, China also wants to push scientific and technological innovation primarily to boost its global standing and cement itself as a leader in the in the EV sector in the auto industry. And on the Chinese platform, a major talking point right now is also about self-reliance, and also in the EV tech. Western tariffs is just becoming another reason for China to go all home in on homegrown solutions that can dominate both locally as well as globally. And in fact, during the promotional videos for the China 100 EV Forum, the co-chairman and chief scientist at Chinese company Aodong New Energy, Zhang Jianping, he actually stated that this year is going to be the start of full integration for China's new energy vehicles, with perhaps vehicle station network storage interaction. And energy storage is absolutely essential, with battery swap stations bridging the pillars and ensuring a balanced dynamic system. And battery swap system is something that perhaps countries such as Taiwan and China are very well equipped with. They're doing a great job with this. So, but when it comes to countries such as the US or European countries, I don't think they're as advanced as China and Taiwan are in terms of battery swapping station or battery swapping ecosystem. So all these factors are actually telling us that China already has a massive edge in EV tech. And if you look at the data, it already controls over 70% of global power battery production. And a prominent Chinese company, CATL, alone is outspending the top 10 European automakers on R&D. And while Europe struggles with charging stations, China has built the world's largest network. I think approximately over or almost 5 million stations, and they're just increasing in number. And so about all these developments and how there is so much pride in what China has been doing in the EV sector, so I looked at Weibo as well, and which is a social Chinese social media website very much like Twitter. So on Weibo, there are a number of users who are hyped about the rapid rise of Chinese EV brands like BYD and Polestar, with sales up to 94% and 84% respectively for both the companies. And of course, there's a lot of comparison between how the Chinese companies are doing over European brands like Volvo and other companies. And now they're seeing that the European brand sales are going down, dropped significantly, whereas the Chinese uh, brands are making a name, definitely making a stride in the EV sector. And of course, one of the main things that were being discussed heavily, and there was a sense of pride that BYD's sale actually kind of beat Tesla's revenue in 2024. So now in Chinese discourse, specifically after what happened to DeepSeek, so this development also made them feel that Chinese brands are actually doing good, not just in the sector of AI, not just in the military sector, but also in sectors such as EV. And of course, EV boom is making waves globally, but in Chinese domestic market too. And this is a matter of pride. This is a matter of appreciation among a lot of social media users within China. And in fact, a report from national broadcaster CCTV, the data from the report showed that in just it's not even March is still going on, and from January 1st till date, over 2 million cars have been traded within China for electrical bikes, and it generated over 5 billion yuan in revenue. And when we talk about the data with respect to consumers, the report stated that over 2 million consumers cashed in on subsidies worth over 1.2 billion yuan. And over 50,000 small businesses also joined in, with each store ranking an average of over 100,000 yuan. So there's definitely some level of dominance for the Chinese EV sector here, and with control over the entire supply chain from lithium mining to battery production, I do feel that China is locking down its dominance, is absolutely moving towards having an even bigger edge in EV sector. And then apart from that, and then of course, domestic production, demand is going up. Then China has been looking at improving its imports of EV in, of course, the Western countries, but then now there is a roadblock with respect to that. So now China has been eyeing alternative market for a while now. But this has been going on for a long time. It's just not that it has just started happening since Trump has come back to power. The US trade policies have, of course, sped things up for China. But that said, expanding into new territories, new market isn't without its challenges. Even with fewer regulations, China still has to deal with, of course, supply chain vulnerabilities, growing competition with local players as well as players from the Western countries. But plus, there's always this pressure to stay ahead in tech, uh, as Europe and US are also trying to ramp up efforts to close this gap. So I think this idea that China has to maintain this edge, China has to maintain this supremacy, is something that is going to take a lot more resources from the Chinese side, both government as well as private sector. But despite this, I don't really see that China is slowing down. And for example, Wei Hang, who is a chair and professor at Shanghai University of Finance and Economics, he stated that China's EV boom has created industry giants like CATL, YD, and there are a lot many name there. So there's definitely this idea that China is locking in its lead in the global supply chain. And to keep winning, to keep this momentum, he suggested that Chinese manufacturers focus on strengthening supply chain, integrating smart tech, AI, and building a seamless smart ecosystem is something that China has to keep focusing on. And that's the only way to survive the price wars and the long term success, to ensure that there is a long term success and China keeps maintaining its edge in the EV sector. So, now what's the bottom line here? Uh, China, I do believe that China isn't just trying to survive the tariffs from the Western world. It is actually using them as a launchpad for its dominance in the EV sector. And the country is turning external pressure into a strategic advantage. There's absolutely this strategic recalibration of its policies in multiple domains, that in a way reinforces its leadership in the EV sector and, of course, in AI as well. And this move away from Western markets just isn't about business. It is a calculated play to reshape global power of dynamics. And over the next decade, I think we have to wait and see if this bold strategy of turning China into a global EV hub is going to pay off, or if rising competition and unforeseen challenges are going to change the game for China's EV revolution. And I think uh, if we look at the Chinese discourse, if that's a telling story of what China has is going to be in the EV sector, I do see that what China is moving towards is to maintain dominance in the EV sector, and I do feel the path towards this objective is not that difficult for China. And the Western tariffs and sanctions, this trade tech war is actually helping China. It's becoming an opportunity rather than becoming a crisis for China. So thank you for watching, and see you next week.